Welcome back to Quick Theological Thoughts. I'm Howard Fisher, and a 4-year-old video showed up on my YouTube feed, and I watched it the other night, and it was a pretty interesting conversation. It's a Louder with Crowder video, and I don't normally watch those, but thought, oh, I'll watch this one. It was actually pretty good. It was a conversation between Mr. Crowder and a woman who is intersex and is arguing for, I guess, a whole nother world, not transgenderism, but that, sex is fluid, gender is fluid, biology is fluid, but not fluid. There's a spectrum. And so we'll just dive into it. Let me pull it up here, and we'll just watch a couple of clips off of it. I'll have to start playing here. And so I just want you to hear a couple of things that she says and his response on two different spots on what they talk about in science. So let's just hear this part here.
Well, so in terms of that spectrum, and where I hope that my existence can shed some light for you, I was actually born intersex, which means that you would never know this, and no one who's ever been with me sexually would ever know this either. But I was actually born with XY chromosomes.
So she's a male.
And so instead of having a uterus and ovaries, I had internal testes that were then removed from me by doctors who come from kind of your perspective and some similar perspectives, that we need to normalize people to fit these society driven standards of what a human is or should look like.
What is a human and what is a standard? Is there one at all? Is she arguing for no standard at all? So a doctor sees that she's mainly female, so they remove the testes, which is clearly underdeveloped, and so they remove that. Was he playing God? Okay, but based upon what? Based upon what he perceives. Based upon what? See, there has to be a standard somewhere. Is she wanting to be boy? Is she wanting to be a girl? Is there a such thing as a boy? Is there a such thing as a girl? And there was something Mr. Stephen here says here at the 45-minute mark of this video, and I want to pull it up here because I thought it was kind of interesting. Let's go ahead and play it.
Is actually a correlation between this identity and a brain that looks a certain way. So people aren't making something up. It's something that intrinsically that they are born feeling and identifying in this way. Right?
Feeling and identifying.
So we have feelings, identifying, maybe not corresponding to biological science. She brings up biological science, but then she says it's the categories that we come up with are societal. So we just made it up. We just made up male. We made up female. There's no actual such thing as a male. No actual such thing as a female. We just see a spectrum of things that seem to be in this category. Oh, that's what science does. It categorizes things. There are things that are quote unquote normal, right?
Yeah. And this is important because the biology and the identification are two very different things. So I'm going to continue along the premise which you originally expressed. I certainly agree with the biology. There is a biologically defined male brain and female brain. They're different. They operate differently. There are different developments and different portions of the brain. They fire differently. They have different levels of neurotransmitters, and they respond to stimuli differently. There's a male brain and a female brain, absolutely.
And
there are some anomalies.
So she denies that there's a lot of that there are two structures, male and female. She's saying that there's a lot of in between. They both agree that there are spectrums, but at this point she's actually denying a male-female brain, that there are other kinds of brains. So she confuses the spectrum, as they talked about earlier in this video, that there's different color hair, different color eyes, so on and so forth, different shades of skin melanin count in your skin, whether you're a redhead or completely white, or you're super dark, one of the or somewhere in between, yeah. But it's all when it comes to skin color, it's all skin, it's all melanin, it's all within the human being, right? So we have we categorize things. Well, we have to have a worldview to do this. And there's something that Stephen says here real quick that I think is interesting.
Very acute number of outliers in between, but not much. There's a male brain and a female brain. Okay, well, if the entire world exists on a spectrum, and then there are limitless genders and limitless brains, how do you determine what's right with the literature? How do you run a scientific study if you're saying there's a limitless number of brain types?
That's the question right there. How do you do science? She doesn't answer that question. She avoids it because once you go down this secularistic path where you're not grounded in anything, where there is no God, there is no creation, everything is just up for grabs. It's what makes right is whoever happens to have the might, and that's what she's accusing him and Western civilization of doing. Is society happens to be the might in this case, so they determined what's right. But that's not true for me, and we know it. Well, you know that absolutely. You did a scientific study. See, science. This is the problem I have with science. I don't care if it's evolutionary science in a naturalistic, materialistic way. I don't care how when it comes to that side of things, it's not grounded. Only the triune Christian God, the biblical God, gives the grounding for knowledge. It gives the prerequisite that is necessary to even do science. And so when God gives us revelation and God says this is the world, it's God's world. All facts are God's facts. There is no such thing as a brute fact. There's no such thing as a fact that exists outside of God's world and outside of God's revelation. Yes, the Bible's not a science book. Yes, the Bible doesn't address every specific thing specifically. But does the Bible give us the categories and the necessary revelation for us to do science, any kind of science? Yes, it gives us the foundation to even begin to do a scientific experiment. And apart from that, you don't have anything. So when Stephen Crowder starts off the video and he says, I'm starting off with my presuppositions, I'm going to tell you what they are. I believe that there's a male and a female. And he starts off with that. And she questions that later on and says, well, I presume you're a Christian. And he says, yes, because that's actually the real presupposition here. The real presupposition here is that the Christian believes in the triune God. The Christian believes that the triune God created the heavens and the earth and all things that are in it from nothing. There was a point where nothing existed except God, and then we have the creation, and there's a created order. And, for instance, I'll bet she believes that murder's wrong, stealing's wrong. Well, how would she know that? Because this is God's world, and she's made in the image of God. She may suppress that truth. She may deny that truth, but it's the only one that grounds that the truth that murder's wrong and stealing's wrong. So for her to do science, she's borrowing from the Christian worldview to say that the Christian worldview isn't true. She's borrowing from the Christian worldview to say words, to think, to have thoughts, to have sentences. She's borrowing the laws of logic from the Christian worldview because her worldview doesn't sustain that. She's arguing that everything's a spectrum. Everything is, she's really arguing that you can't do science. And yet the whole time she's arguing from scientific studies. A scientific study shows this, a scientific study shows that. As if these scientific studies were brute facts. We're just looking at facts. No. She is approaching science from a secularistic, naturalistic, humanistic viewpoint, which doesn't have God. And she's able to make science and twist science to say whatever it is she wants to say. That's the problem with what we as Christians, we're trying to point out. This is the problem. It's not the scientific studies. It's not the facts. It's our presuppositions as we evaluate the facts. We're both looking at the same facts, and we're interpreting them in radically different ways. Why is that? Because one side's starting off from naturalistic, materialistic viewpoints, and the other side is saying, no, this is God's world, and you can't even approach science from that perspective. That's the problem. That's the problem with this whole conversation. She'll never see that because she's so engaged to, how can you deny my existence? We're not denying your existence. How can you deny my science? We're not denying your science. But what we're saying is this myth of neutrality, that you can just approach science just by, I'm just objective and I'm neutral and I'm just looking at the evidence. That's pure baloney. It's not happening. The rebel sinner is exactly that, a rebel sinner. And the rebel sinner is not looking at the scientific evidence in an honest way. Are there anomalies in human beings? Do we have intersex people? Sure we do. But those kinds of things, a person with 6 fingers, Down syndrome, people born with they can't walk, they can't talk, they can't. What's the first thing when you see somebody born who's quadriplegic, who has cerebral palsy, Down syndrome of some kind? What's the first thing we say? Well, that's not normal. That person needs what? That person needs help. You Christians say God made everybody fearfully, and everybody is fearfully and wonderfully made. How can we say that if we have these problems, right? How you're saying they're not normal? Yeah, they're not normal. They remind us of our humanity, that we're actually not any better than anybody else, and we're actually seeing how fragile our humanity can be, and that is evidence of a sinful and fallen world that God is giving to us as a blessing to remind us we're not on our own, that we are utterly dependent upon Him for our existence. So even the healthiest, most quote-unquote normal person that exists must look at the world around him going, you know what? I live in a fallen world. I'm fallen too. And these people who are not as normal as I am are reminding me of my humanity, that we're all in this together. And that the outliers, those who, the very, very, very tiny few who are intersex, that's an issue we have to face, we have to look at, and we have to discuss. But we have to do it from a Christian worldview, knowing that this is a fallen world, knowing that the normal is, as Jesus himself taught, God made them male and female. In the image of God, he made them, that they are to exercise dominion, have children, so on and so forth. Are there problems in this world? Is that perfect ideal world, does it exist? Is that what we're supposed to have? Yeah, we're supposed to have. So anyway, I better shut up. So anyway, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Be good. God bless.